I didn't believe in the backrooms. Not really. It was just some internet creepypasta, a collection of grainy yellow photos and overused phrases like liminal space and no clipping out of reality. People treated it like a game. Map out the levels, write your own additions, scare each other with theories. But it wasn't real. At least, that's what I thought until last summer. I was in Chicago for work, staying at a hotel near O'Hare. A corporate conference, the kind where everyone pretends to be interested in financial projections and leadership seminars. I had planned to fly back to Denver the next morning, but when my phone buzzed with an alert about flight delays, I sighed and resigned myself to one more night in this soulless business district. I decided to go for a walk. The area was dead at night, just empty sidewalks, the occasional neon glow from a gas station, and the distant hum of highway traffic. I didn't want to go far, just enough to stretch my legs, so I wandered into a nearby office complex. It wasn't abandoned, just off. The buildings were modern, all glass and steel, but there was no movement inside, no security guards, no janitors. The parking lot was full of cars, but the whole place felt hollow. Then I saw the door. It was one of those industrial side entrances, half hidden in an alley between two buildings. A sign above it read, "Service Tunnel. Authorized personnel only." The door was propped open with a brick. Now, I don't know why I went inside. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I thought I'd find some weird underground hallway that led back to the main streets. Whatever the reason, I stepped in. The hallway was long, lined with flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled stale, like old carpet and dust. I expected to see janitor carts, utility closets, something to indicate this was just a maintenance corridor. Instead, the walls stretched further than they should have, turning in ways that didn't make sense. I took another step forward, and the world tilted. I don't mean I got dizzy. I mean the hallway itself twisted, like reality folded around me. My stomach lurched, and suddenly I wasn't in the service tunnel anymore. I was in the back rooms. At first, I thought it was some underground storage area beneath the office complex. The walls were yellowed, covered in that cheap, patterned wallpaper that looked like it belonged in an old doctor's office. The floor was covered in thin brown carpet, slightly damp under my shoes. The worst part? The buzzing. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. A deep electrical hum that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. The sound came from the ceiling lights, which flickered in and out of sync like they were running on faulty wiring. I turned around. The door was gone. That's when the panic set in. I ran back the way I thought I came, but the hallway twisted into itself, branching off into identical passages. Every turn led to more of the same. Yellow walls, buzzing lights, damp carpet. No exits, no furniture, just an endless, empty maze. I grabbed my phone. No signal. No GPS. Okay. Stay calm. Maybe I had gotten turned around. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Then I noticed something else. The air felt wrong. Not just stale, but pressurized, like the whole place was slightly off balance. And the further I walked, the more I realized the hallways weren't normal. Some were too wide, others too narrow. Some ceilings were impossibly high, stretching up into darkness. One hallway had a corner that bent almost 90 degrees, but not quite. The angles weren't right. I tried marking my path, tearing a strip off my shirt and tying it to a corner. 5 minutes later, I turned a corner and found the same fabric strip, tied to a different wall. I wasn't just lost. This place was moving. And then I heard footsteps. I froze. The sound was distant but unmistakable. Slow, shuffling steps on damp carpet. At first, I thought it might be another person. Maybe a maintenance worker. Maybe some poor idiot who had wandered in like me. But then the footsteps stopped, and a low, ragged breath echoed through the hall. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The air was thick with something I can only describe as watching. Like whatever was making that noise knew I was here. I turned off my phone's screen and pressed myself against the wall, listening. Another breath. Closer this time. And then, so quietly I almost missed it. A clicking sound. Like fingernails tapping against glass. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, just around the next corner. Something was waiting. I had two choices: stand still and hope it left, or run. So I ran. I bolted down the hallway, not caring about the noise, just sprinting as fast as I could. The buzzing lights above flickered violently as I passed, casting long, shifting shadows. The thing behind me started moving too, not running, just walking, a slow, deliberate pace, like it knew I had nowhere to go. I turned a corner. Dead end. Spinning around, I saw the hallway behind me stretch, growing longer by the second. The figure, still hidden in the dim light, was further away now, but still moving forward. The shadows near its feet were wrong. They didn't move with the flickering lights. They moved on their own. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling for anything, any gap, any doorway, any escape. My fingers brushed something small and cold. A key. It was sticking out of the wall, as if someone had left it there for me. I grabbed it and turned. There was a door now, a plain gray door that hadn't been there seconds ago. The thing was getting closer. No time to think. I jammed the key into the lock, turned it, and threw myself inside. And suddenly, I was standing in a different room. It was dark. No buzzing lights, no yellow wallpaper, just black tiles, cold air, and the sound of distant water dripping. But I wasn't safe. I wasn't back home. I had just entered level 2. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into near-total darkness. The only light came from a thin, flickering strip above, casting a dull glow on the cold black tiles beneath my feet. The air was different here, heavier, colder, carrying the distant sound of dripping water. I turned back to the door, but there was nothing behind me now. Just a wall. My breath came fast, too loud in the silence. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but the screen remained dead. No service, no way to check the time. I had no idea how long I had been in here, how much time had passed since I stepped through that stupid service door in Chicago. My legs ached, my heart pounded in my chest, and worst of all, I wasn't sure I was alone. This place was different from where I had been before. Gone was the endless maze of yellow wallpaper and flickering lights. Here, the floor was sleek, black tile, slick as if coated in condensation. The walls were bare concrete, and pipes ran along the ceiling, some dripping an oily liquid that smelled metallic. The air was damp, thick with the scent of mildew and rust. Somewhere far off, water dripped in an irregular rhythm. I listened, trying to determine the size of the space around me, but the echoes stretched on endlessly. I moved forward. The tiles were freezing under my shoes, each step sending a jolt of cold up my legs. The silence pressed in on me, unnatural and absolute, broken only by the occasional drip from the unseen pipes above. I forced myself to keep moving, choosing a direction at random, trying not to let the dread creeping into my chest take over. Then I heard it. Not a footstep, not breathing. A low, metallic groan, like something massive shifting in the distance. I froze, my entire body going rigid. The sound was deep, vibrating through the floor. Something impossibly large stirring somewhere in the darkness ahead. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. Another groan, closer this time, and then a wet, dragging sound. I backed away, careful not to let my footsteps echo. My breath caught in my throat. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned a corner, only to find myself standing at the edge of a flooded hallway. The black tile disappeared beneath murky water, stretching out ahead of me into the dark. The pipes above gurgled, releasing occasional bubbles into the still surface. The smell was worse here. Damp, stagnant, mixed with something chemical. The dragging sound came again. It was moving toward me. I looked around, searching for somewhere to hide, but the walls were smooth and featureless. The only way forward was through the water. I hesitated for only a second before stepping in. The moment my foot broke the surface, the cold was unbearable. It was like stepping into ice, the shock shooting up my leg, stealing my breath. But I forced myself forward, wading in until the water reached my knees, then my waist. It was thick, clinging to my clothes, making every movement sluggish. Something rippled behind me. I didn't turn around. I forced my way forward, the water growing deeper, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound behind me grew louder. The dragging had stopped. Now it was splashing, moving. I reached the other side of the hallway, my fingers scraping against metal. A ladder. I didn't think. I just climbed. Hand over hand, I pulled myself up, the metal ice cold beneath my grip. Below me, the water churned violently, but I didn't dare look down. I climbed until my hands met another door, rusted and damp, set into the concrete wall. I shoved against it, my muscles burning, but it barely budged. Something brushed against my ankle. I kicked wildly, my heart slamming against my ribs, and with one final push, the door groaned open. I scrambled inside, falling onto solid ground, slamming the door shut behind me. Silence. I lay there, chest heaving, listening. No sound. No water. Just the faint hum of something mechanical, distant but steady. I forced myself up, my soaked clothes sticking to my skin. This room was different. Dimly lit, lined with old metal cabinets and flickering computer monitors. A control room of some kind, the air thick with the smell of dust and old circuitry. The screens displayed static, the images flickering in and out. One of them changed. For a brief second, I saw a hallway. Not this one, a different one. Yellow walls, flickering lights, and standing in the center of the frame, facing away from the camera. A figure, tall, gaunt, unmoving. Then the screen flickered again, returning to static. A deep sense of dread settled in my gut. I wasn't just trapped here. Something was watching. I stood there, dripping wet, my breath coming in uneven gasps. The static on the monitor crackled, the image gone, but the feeling remained. Something had been watching me. Maybe it still was. I didn't want to stay in this room any longer than I had to. The hum of unseen machinery filled the air, and the walls were lined with rusted control panels, their buttons long dead, their switches frozen in place. Dust clung to the surfaces like a layer of forgotten time. I moved carefully, my shoes squelching against the damp floor. Every sound seemed louder in the silence. The only exit was a metal door on the far side of the room, its edges corroded, streaked with dark stains. I reached out and pressed my hand against it. It was warm. Not just warm, hot, like something on the other side was radiating heat. I hesitated, then gritted my teeth and pulled it open. The wave of warmth hit me instantly, thick and suffocating. I stepped into a narrow, rusted walkway suspended over an expanse of massive industrial pipes. Steam hissed from unseen vents below, the air dense with the smell of burning metal. The ceiling stretched impossibly high above, disappearing into darkness. The walkway creaked under my weight, and I realized the metal beneath my feet was warped, dented, like something heavy had been through here before. I moved forward, gripping the rusted railing. The path stretched ahead, a maze of catwalks, ladders, and rusted platforms. I could hear something, deep, rhythmic, mechanical, a heartbeat of the structure itself, pulsing in the distance. It felt alive, but not in any way I understood. I needed to find an exit. I reached a junction where the walkway split into two paths. One led downward, spiraling along the massive pipes into the darkness below. The other extended forward, disappearing behind a wall of rising steam. Neither seemed safe, but standing here wasn't an option. I turned to head forward. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate clang. Metal shifting. Something moving. I didn't look. I didn't want to. I pressed forward, forcing my steps to stay quiet. The steam curled around me, and for a brief moment I felt something shift in the air behind me, like a presence, something large. I kept moving, gripping the railing to steady myself. The walkway shook beneath my feet, a deep groan vibrating through the metal. Then, another sound. Not the hum of machinery, not the shifting of pipes. Breathing. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse over my shoulder. Something was standing at the junction I had just left. It was tall, almost impossibly tall, its form stretched and thin, blending with the steam and shadows. It didn't move, but I knew it saw me. Even without eyes, I felt its gaze. The space between us felt wrong, like it was shrinking, collapsing, even though neither of us moved. Then, slowly, it took a step forward. The metal groaned under its weight, the structure trembling. I ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. The walkway rattled with every step. The sound of my pounding footsteps, swallowed by the hiss of steam and the deep, rhythmic hum of whatever machinery ran this place. I could hear it behind me. Steady, unhurried steps. Too long, too heavy. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. The path ahead ended in a vertical ladder leading down. no time to think. I swung over the edge and climbed. The rungs burned against my wet hands, but I didn't stop. I climbed down into darkness, the sound of the thing above still moving, still watching. Halfway down, the ladder jolted. Something had grabbed it. I lost my grip, my fingers slipping, my body plunging into the void below. I hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, my vision exploding with white. For a moment, I couldn't move. My ears rang, my body screaming in protest. I rolled onto my side, gasping for breath, trying to force my limbs to respond. Above me, the ladder creaked. It was still coming. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling into the darkness. The ground was solid metal, the air thick with heat and smoke. I could barely see, my body throbbing with pain. Ahead, faint red lights flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. A corridor. I pushed forward, every step an effort, the sounds behind me growing closer. The passage twisted, narrowing, forcing me to squeeze through gaps in the rusted walls. The red lights pulsed, leading me forward, guiding me deeper into whatever this place was. My breath came in ragged gasps. The walls pressed in on me. My vision blurred. Then, suddenly, I stepped out into open space. A massive chamber stretched out before me, filled with rows of metal platforms suspended over a dark void. Thick cables hung from the ceiling, swaying gently, their ends disappearing into the abyss below. At the far end of the room, a single door stood slightly ajar, pale light spilling through the crack. An exit. I didn't hesitate. I ran. The floor trembled beneath me, something shifting in the darkness below. I could hear it moving, slithering, dragging itself along the metal. I didn't look down. I kept my eyes on the door. 10 feet away. 5. A scream erupted from below, a sound that wasn't human. I threw myself forward, lunging through the doorway, hitting the ground hard. I scrambled up and slammed the door shut behind me. Silence. My heart pounded, my hands shaking violently. I was in another hallway, but this one was different. The walls were concrete, bare, unmarked. The floor was smooth, sterile. The air was still. Ahead of me, the hallway stretched into the distance, and at the far end, there was an elevator. For the first time since I had arrived here, I felt something close to hope. I moved forward, my steps slow, cautious. The elevator doors were closed, but the panel beside them glowed with a single green light. A button. I pressed it. A low chime echoed through the hall. The doors slid open. The inside of the elevator was clean, modern, completely out of place in this nightmare. A single panel of buttons lined the side, each labeled with a number. I stepped inside. The doors closed. The buttons glowed. There was no lobby, no exit, no familiar floors, just a sequence of numbers. And at the bottom, a button labeled Level 3. I stared at it, my breath hitching. My mind screamed at me not to press it. But what choice did I have? I reached out, and I pressed the button. The elevator shuddered as it began its descent. The floor beneath me vibrated, the dim overhead light flickering in a slow, rhythmic pulse. I kept my back against the wall, my hands pressed against the cold metal, trying to steady my breathing. The air inside the elevator was thick, stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The numbers on the panel didn't change. There was no floor indicator, no movement of the dials, just the unsettling hum of unseen machinery lowering me deeper into whatever this place was. I glanced at my reflection in the elevator doors, barely recognizing myself. My clothes were still soaked, clinging to my body. My skin was pale, my eyes wide and bloodshot. I looked like someone who had been running for their life. The elevator slowed. A dull chime echoed through the small space. The doors slid open. I didn't move at first. I waited, listening, expecting something to be waiting just beyond the threshold. But there was only silence. The hallway outside was long, lined with dark, damp walls. The ceiling was low, making the space feel claustrophobic. The air was warmer here, but not in a comforting way. It was wrong, stagnant, heavy, carrying the faint scent of something rotting. I stepped forward. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, sealing me in. The sound echoed down the corridor, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I turned, pressing my hand against the wall, feeling the rough, uneven texture beneath my fingers. The dampness seeped into my skin, a mix of condensation and something thicker. I didn't want to think about what it was. I started walking. The corridor stretched on longer than it should have, the walls shifting slightly the further I moved. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw it. Small changes, almost imperceptible. The texture of the walls rippled, the colors darkening, the angles bending in ways that weren't natural. My footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was absorbing the noise. Then, up ahead, something moved. A shadow. It darted just out of sight, disappearing around a corner. I stopped. My pulse pounded against my ribs, my body screaming at me to turn back. But where would I go? The elevator was gone, and there was nothing behind me now except endless darkness. I forced myself forward. The hallway turned sharply, opening into a wider space, something that resembled an underground parking garage, but stripped of anything recognizable. The ceiling was higher here, lined with thick pipes that dripped steadily onto the concrete floor. The space was filled with towering concrete pillars, each one stretching up into the shadows above. In the distance, a flickering light buzzed weakly, barely illuminating the far end of the room. Something wasn't right. The shadows between the pillars felt deeper than they should have been, stretching unnaturally, moving even when nothing else did. I kept close to one of the walls, scanning the area, my body tense, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then I heard it. A soft, scraping sound. It was slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead. I crouched behind one of the pillars, my breathing shallow, trying to pinpoint the source. The scraping continued, rhythmic, like something sharp being dragged across concrete. It grew louder. I shifted slightly, peeking out from behind the pillar. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized how wrong that assumption was. It was tall, its body stretched unnaturally thin, its arms too long, its fingers dragging against the floor as it moved. Its skin was gray, almost translucent, clinging to its bones like it had been starved for years. But the worst part was its head. It had no eyes, no nose, just a gaping, hollow mouth, opening and closing soundlessly as it moved. And it was searching. I pressed my back against the pillar, biting my lip to keep from making a sound. My heart pounded so hard I swore it could hear me. The creature moved slowly, its long fingers tapping lightly against the floor as it navigated the space. Then, without warning, it stopped. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening. The air around me felt heavier, thick with the smell of decay. I stayed still, not even daring to breathe. The creature took another step, then another. And then, a drop of water fell from one of the pipes above, hitting the ground with a soft plip. The thing's head snapped toward the sound, and it lunged. It moved fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to. Its limbs contorted, its body twisting unnaturally as it launched itself toward the noise. The moment it was distracted, I bolted. I ran, weaving between the pillars, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The space was endless, the flickering light in the distance barely getting any closer. Behind me, I could hear it moving, its limbs skittering against the ground as it adjusted its path. There was no way I could outrun it. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A doorway. It was small, almost hidden in the shadows along the far wall. The frame was rusted, the door slightly ajar, revealing a pitch-black corridor beyond. It wasn't a way out, but it was a way away. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself through the doorway, slamming into the wall inside. My hands scrambled for the door, gripping the rusted edge. I yanked it shut just as the creature reached the threshold. For a split second, we were face to face. That hollow, gaping mouth stretched wider, its head twitching, its hands clawing at the doorframe. I threw my weight against the door, shoving it closed. The moment it latched, everything went silent. I stumbled back, my chest heaving. The only sound now was my own breathing, ragged and uneven. My hands shook as I pressed them against my knees, trying to keep myself from collapsing. Then I looked up. I was in another hallway. This one was different. The walls were smooth, impossibly clean, the air dry and sterile. The buzzing was gone, replaced by something even more unsettling. A deep, mechanical hum. And ahead of me, at the very end of the corridor, stood a single metal door. A sign was bolted above it. "Staff only." I had no choice. I started walking. The hum grew louder as I moved forward, low and constant, vibrating through the walls. It wasn't mechanical in the way a machine hums. It felt deeper, like something alive, something pulsing beneath the surface. My footsteps barely made a sound on the smooth floor, and every breath felt like it was being swallowed by the silence. The staff-only door was different from the others I had encountered. It wasn't rusted, wasn't warped. It looked new, solid, like it belonged in a high-security facility. No dents, no grime. Just a simple metal door with a keypad beside it. I didn't know the code. I reached out hesitantly, fingers hovering over the panel. Maybe I could guess it. Maybe I could pry the door open. But before I could try either, a small click echoed from the lock. The keypad blinked green. The door unlocked. I didn't touch anything. I stepped back, heart hammering against my ribs. Someone, or something, had just let me in. I glanced over my shoulder. The hallway behind me was empty, but I didn't trust it to stay that way. There was no turning back. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The moment I did, the door swung shut behind me, locking with a heavy clunk. I was in an office. Not like the rest of this place. This one was pristine, sterile. The walls were painted a pale, artificial white, the floor smooth and seamless. A row of old computer monitors sat along one side of the room, each displaying lines of text that scrolled too fast for me to read. Filing cabinets stood neatly against the opposite wall, and a single metal desk sat in the center of the room. Something felt wrong. I moved toward the desk, my fingers brushing against its cold surface. There was a single file sitting on top, a thick folder labeled Incident Report, Level 3. My name wasn't on it, but something told me I needed to open it. I flipped it open. The first page was a typed report dated years ago. Subject number 27, Unaccounted Entry Detected. Time of entry, 02:46 a.m. Origin, unknown. Behavior, subject appears disoriented, unprepared for environmental hazards, unaware of containment procedures. Outcome, pending. I turned the page. Black and white surveillance photos filled the next section. Grainy images of hallways, stairwells, dimly lit corridors. But one made my blood run cold. It was me. I was standing in the yellow-lit hallway from before, my back to the camera, caught mid-step. The angle was high, like it had been taken from the ceiling. I turned another page. More photos, more hallways, more people. They weren't moving. They weren't running. They were just standing there, all of them facing away from the camera, motionless. Something in my stomach twisted violently. I shut the folder, shoving it back onto the desk. Then I heard it. A soft click. I turned sharply. The monitors on the wall flickered, the scrolling text vanishing. One by one, the screens went black. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, white text appeared on a single screen. Don't turn around. Every muscle in my body locked. I felt it before I heard it. A shift in the air, a weight pressing into the space behind me. Something was there, close enough that I could hear a faint, uneven breath. The text changed. If you run, it will follow. My throat tightened. The breath behind me grew heavier, slow and ragged, a presence so close that I could almost feel it leaning toward me. Another line of text appeared. Walk to the door. Do not look. Do not speak. I moved. One step, then another. The thing behind me shifted. A whisper of movement. I reached the door. My hand found the handle. The last message appeared on the screen. If you look, you stay here. I didn't look. I turned the handle and stepped through. The air changed instantly. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was somewhere new. No more sterile walls. No more flickering lights. I was outside. At least, it looked like outside. A vast, empty parking lot stretched in front of me, lined with endless, identical streetlights. The pavement was cracked, uneven. Beyond it, nothing but darkness. No buildings, no roads. Just the cold glow of fluorescent lights stretching into the void. The sky above was wrong. Black, but not empty. The stars weren't stars. They were shapes. shifting, stretching, disappearing the moment I tried to focus on them. And then, in the distance, a gas station. It stood alone, its neon open sign flickering weakly, the only structure in this infinite emptiness. It was the only place to go. I started walking. The pavement beneath my feet was cracked and uneven, each step sending small echoes through the empty lot. The streetlights buzzed softly, casting pale pools of light onto the asphalt. But beyond them, there was nothing, just an endless black void stretching in all directions. The gas station stood alone in the distance, its open sign flickering weakly, pulsing in and out of existence like it was struggling to stay real. The closer I got, the more I noticed things that didn't make sense. The gas pumps were old, outdated models I hadn't seen in years, their hoses cracked and dry. The building itself looked abandoned, but the lights inside were on, a dull yellow glow spilling out through dirty glass windows. A single car was parked at one of the pumps, an old sedan, rusted and covered in dust. The driver's side door was open, but there was no one inside. I hesitated at the edge of the lot. Something about this felt off, but I didn't have a choice. I stepped forward. The moment my foot touched the concrete curb, a soft ding echoed from inside the station, like one of those old door chimes that let the clerk know someone had entered. But I hadn't even reached the door yet. I swallowed hard and moved closer. The windows were too dirty to see inside clearly, but I could make out the vague outline of shelves, a counter, and what looked like a figure standing behind the register. They weren't moving, just standing there, waiting. I reached for the door handle. My fingers barely brushed against the metal when the open sign went out. Every light inside the gas station shut off at once. The entire building went dark. I froze. Then, from somewhere deep inside the station, I heard something shift. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I took a step back. The open sign flickered back on. So did the lights. The figure behind the counter was gone. My pulse pounded against my ribs. I didn't want to go in, but the endless void behind me offered no alternatives. Staying out here wasn't an option. I clenched my jaw, pulled the door open, and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. The inside of the gas station smelled like dust and old air. The shelves were mostly empty, lined with faded snack wrappers and half-full boxes of things I didn't recognize. The refrigerator doors hummed, their glass fogged over, but there were no drinks inside. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, flickering slightly, casting long shadows across the cracked tile floor. The counter stood at the far end of the room. No one was there. I moved carefully, my eyes scanning every inch of the store. The layout was familiar. Rows of shelves, a single bathroom door near the back, a storage room door beside it. Everything looked like a normal gas station, except for the subtle wrong details. The brand names on the few remaining snacks weren't brands I recognized. The posters on the walls advertised events with dates that didn't exist. Even the clock above the counter wasn't moving, its hands frozen at 3:03. Then, behind me, a voice. "Need help?" I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. A man stood behind the counter. I hadn't heard him come in, hadn't seen him appear. He was just there, like he had been standing there the whole time, waiting for me to turn around. He looked normal enough. His uniform was clean, his name tag read Jim, and his face was expressionless. Too expressionless. His eyes were wrong. Not inhuman, not monstrous. Just empty. Like they weren't focused on anything. Like he was looking through me. I swallowed hard. I think I'm lost, I said. Jim didn't blink. You came from level 3? The words sent a chill through my spine. He knew. I nodded slowly. Jim tilted his head slightly, his movements stiff, unnatural. Then he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, crumpled map. He slid it toward me without a word. I hesitated before picking it up. The paper was old, yellowed, the ink smudged in places. There was no title, no explanation, just a series of numbered paths leading from one level to another. Some of the paths were marked with red X's. Others just stopped abruptly, ending in nothing. At the bottom of the map, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't go to level 7. I looked back up at Jim. What is this place? He blinked. Just once. Another transition, he said. You should keep moving. I wanted to ask more questions, but something about the way he stood there, motionless, made my skin crawl. I folded the map and took a step back. Then I noticed something. The gas station had 2 doors. The one I had come through, and another, smaller door near the back of the room, beneath a flickering exit sign. I hadn't noticed it before. Jim followed my gaze. That door's yours, he said. I didn't move. What's on the other side? For the first time, his expression changed. Just slightly. It's better if you don't ask. A thick, suffocating silence filled the air. Jim didn't speak again. He just stood there, waiting. I didn't want to stay any longer. I turned toward the exit door, reached for the handle, and pulled it open. The moment I did, I felt it. The air shifted. The world behind me disappeared. And I stepped into level 4. The door shut behind me with a final, absolute click. I turned. The air was cold, much colder than the gas station. My breath came out in a faint mist, vanishing into the dimly lit space ahead. The floor beneath me was smooth linoleum, pale gray, stretching out in every direction. The walls were the same lifeless color, perfectly clean, with no stains, no dirt, no marks at all, like they had never been touched. The only sound was the faint hum of unseen fluorescent lights. I was in an office building, or at least it looked like one. Rows of cubicles stretched endlessly before me, each identical, neatly arranged desks, black computer monitors that weren't turned on, file cabinets that looked full but had no labels. Everything was in perfect order, untouched, waiting. I wasn't alone. I felt it immediately. Not like level 3, where something had been hunting me. This was different. The air here felt observed. Like the moment I had stepped through that door, something had become aware of me. I moved forward cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. As I passed the first cubicle, I glanced inside. A desk phone, a stapler, a notepad with writing on it. The ink was smudged, but I could still make out the words, "You shouldn't be here." My stomach clenched. I kept walking. The further I went, the stranger things became. The cubicles stretched on endlessly, each desk identical to the last. But the details were wrong. Some phones had their receivers off the hook, hanging limp over the desk edge. Some notepads had scribbles, like someone had written frantically and then tried to erase it. And then I passed a desk that had something worse. A cup of coffee, still steaming. My mouth went dry. Someone had been here recently. Or worse, they still were. A faint ding echoed from somewhere ahead. The sound of an elevator arriving. I stopped, heart hammering. Another ding. Closer. Something was moving through the office. I ducked into a cubicle, crouching low behind a desk, forcing my breaths to stay quiet. My entire body was tense, every muscle screaming for me to run. But I didn't know where to go. The elevator sound wasn't stopping. Ding. Then, footsteps. Slow. Even. Something walking across the linoleum. I couldn't see it from my hiding spot, but I could hear it. Ding. The sound moved again, closer now. I risked a glance. At the far end of the hallway, a figure stood just outside an open elevator. Its back was to me, tall and unmoving, dressed in what looked like an office suit. But its head was wrong. Elongated, stretched slightly too tall, its shape unnatural. It stood motionless, like it was waiting. Then, it turned its head. Not its body, just the head. It tilted, scanning the empty rows of cubicles. I forced myself to stay still. My heartbeat so loud I swore it would hear me. Then, without a sound, the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, everything went black. And when the lights came back, the figure was closer. I nearly gasped, slapping a hand over my mouth. It was still facing away, but it had moved, impossibly fast, standing only a few rows of cubicles away now. The lights flickered again. Another blackout. And when they returned, it was right there, just inches away from my hiding spot. I could hear it breathe. Slow, ragged inhales. A shuddering, unnatural exhale. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. The figure remained still for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it walked away. I didn't dare move until I was sure it was gone. The elevator door closed, the soft ding echoing through the empty office. And just like that, the presence was gone. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to move. I had to get out of here. I navigated the maze of cubicles, keeping my steps as silent as possible, searching for anything. A stairwell, a fire exit, anything that could lead me out of this level. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A conference room. The door was open slightly, the inside dimly lit. I hesitated, but something in my gut told me it was important. I stepped inside. The moment I did, I realized something was wrong. The conference table was covered in papers, dozens of them scattered across the surface, some yellowed and aged, others fresh. The chairs were pulled back, as if a meeting had just ended. And at the head of the table, a television. It was an old CRT monitor, the kind from the late 90s, sitting on a rolling cart. It was turned on. Static filled the screen. I took a step closer. The static shifted. a video began to play. At first, it was just a hallway, the same kind as the office I was in. The camera was moving, as if someone was holding it, walking slowly. Then, the camera turned a corner, and I saw myself. My blood ran cold. It was a live feed. The person holding the camera was filming me, right now. I spun around. The conference room was empty, but from somewhere in the office, beyond the walls, I heard footsteps, moving fast, coming straight for me. I didn't think. I ran. The conference room door slammed behind me as I bolted into the maze of cubicles, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The footsteps behind me were fast, inhumanly fast. I could hear them pounding against the linoleum, closing the distance. I dodged past desks, rounded a corner, my pulse hammering in my ears. A light flickered up ahead. I spotted a stairwell sign. I sprinted for it, shoving the heavy door open just as something crashed into the cubicle behind me, sending papers flying. I didn't look back. I threw myself into the stairwell and slammed the door shut, jamming my body against it, my hands fumbling for the lock. Then, silence. No banging. No footsteps. Just the quiet hum of the stairwell lights. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking. The air here was different. Stale. Heavy. I looked down the stairs. The steps spiraled downward, disappearing into the dark. A dull mechanical sound vibrated through the walls, a deep, constant hum, like something massive was moving far below. I swallowed hard. I had no choice. I descended. The stairs went on forever. My legs burned, but I kept moving, gripping the cold metal railing as I went deeper and deeper. The walls grew damp, the air colder. The further I went, the worse it got. My ears popped, my skin prickled. A sense of wrongness wrapped around me, growing thicker with each step. Then I saw it. A door at the bottom of the stairwell. It was different from the others. Old, wooden, its surface covered in scratches, as if something had tried to claw its way out. My chest tightened, but there was nowhere else to go. I reached for the handle. It turned easily, too easily, and the door swung open. The air hit me like a wave, cold, damp, and heavy with the stench of mold and stagnant water. I stepped forward into darkness. The stairwell was gone. The office was gone. I was somewhere else. The ground beneath me was rough, uneven, concrete, cracked and wet. Pipes ran along the walls, dripping a thick, black liquid. The ceiling was low, pressing down on me, making me feel trapped. I couldn't see the end of the corridor ahead. A faint light pulsed in the distance. I walked forward. Each step echoed too loudly, like the space around me was watching. The air was thick, clinging to my skin, making my movements sluggish. I felt lightheaded, like the very act of breathing here was wrong. Then I heard it, a deep, gurgling sound. Slow, wet, breathing. I stopped moving. The light ahead flickered. Something shifted in the darkness. Something massive. A shape unfolded from the shadows, its body long, twisted, its limbs too many. It didn't move like a person. It flowed, its form bending unnaturally as it pulled itself forward. It was watching me, not with eyes. It had no eyes, but I knew it could see. A deep shudder rolled through its body, a sound vibrating from deep within it, low, guttural, a sound I felt in my bones. Then it moved. Fast. I ran. The corridor twisted, the pipes groaning above me. The thing behind me was faster, its body slamming against the walls, its limbs skittering across the floor, the ceiling, the walls. The light ahead was closer now. A metal door. I threw myself forward, reaching, praying. The creature lunged. A hand, or something like a hand, clawed at my ankle. I kicked, twisted, my fingers grasping the door handle. I pulled, and everything changed. The last room. I hit solid ground, my body slamming into a floor that was clean, smooth, white. The stench of mold and rot was gone. The air was still, silent. I was in a hospital, or something that looked like one. The walls were pristine, the overhead lights a soft, artificial white. A single hallway stretched ahead of me, lined with closed doors, each identical, numbered in perfect order. I pushed myself up, my breath ragged, my mind spinning. Where was I now? Then, a door at the end of the hallway opened, and I walked out. Not into another level, not into darkness. I walked into Chicago, back onto the same street where I had first found the service tunnel. The air was cool, the sounds of distant traffic real. The office complex was still there. The city lights glowed beyond it. I stumbled forward, my chest heaving. I was back. I turned, my hands trembling. The door behind me was gone. Just a plain alley wall, no sign of any entrance. No service tunnel, no proof it had ever existed. I stared. For a long time, I just stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to convince myself it had been real. Then, slowly, I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against something. I pulled it out. A single piece of paper, crumpled, stained. A map. The same map Jim had given me at the gas station. It was real. I stared down at it, my pulse hammering, my breath catching in my throat. Then, at the very bottom of the page, where I had seen the words before, "Don't go to level 7. There was something new written beneath it, scrawled in shaking handwriting. You weren't supposed to leave.